think that 32,000 people have to get up every morning at 2 o'clock and go to a checkpoint to go through, and I can't imagine what it's like now because it's gotten a lot worse since we were there 2 weeks ago, and have to go through that checkpoint just to try to make a living to support themselves and a family. That's what it's about.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City into northern New Jersey. At the website, thestruggle.org, and our YouTube channel is Struggle Video Media. We begin with shocking video from Aida camp near Bethlehem. A jeep of Israeli soldiers driving through the camp, blaring a message that they would gas to death everyone in the camp if stones were thrown at them, and to slaughter one of the residents that the soldiers had just kidnapped. Please read the subtitles. Now, after that video went viral, the Israeli military announced that a soldier had been suspended. No doubt he'll lay low for a while and then resume his service. In a civilized army, a soldier who made a threat to gas a population to death and to butcher a prisoner in full view would have been arrested and charged. By the way, a Palestinian baby did die from tear gas October 30th. The British paper The Guardian reported. The baby, named Ramadan Mohammed Faisal Thawabta, suffocated inside the family home in Beit Fajr, a village south of Bethlehem. Now, this is a report on that death on the Facebook page of the site The Times of Israel. Posted to it as comments were hundreds of expressions mocking the death of the baby, claiming falsely that Palestinians had brought the baby to a clash with Israeli soldiers. Remember, the baby died in his own house. In fact, it's very possible that the tear gas was thrown deliberately right into the house, as they say, to teach the Palestinians a lesson. Now, some very good news on the BDS front. The 200,000-member Connecticut AFL-CIO responded to requests by its machinists and building trades councils and issued a request to the National AFL-CIO Federation to join in a BDS campaign. That's a stunning move. National U.S. union leaders have been strong supporters of Israel. The decision, which was made at the convention by way of a resolution, talked about the work had been done by the union with the Tree of Life Education Fund, which is based in the Congregational Church of Old Lyme. Now some video of talks at one of that church's conferences, first by Connecticut AFL-CIO President Emeritus John Olsen, and then by retired senior pastor David Good of that church. Both had gone in September on a labor tour of Palestine, Israel, a few weeks before the latest mass uprising.
David Good had come to me 2 years ago to see if the Connecticut AFL-CIO would be willing to welcome a delegation from the Palestinian workers, their representatives, to come speak at the Connecticut AFL-CIO convention. I welcomed them to come. We really want to be in solidarity with workers all across this nation, all across the world, because that's what's important to us. We've always believed an injury to one is an injury to all. 2 years later, David had come to the Connecticut AFL-CIO and asked if there would be a delegation that would be willing to reciprocate and go and to visit Palestine as a delegation. And I was able to participate in that delegation. We had a great, strong delegation to go over to participate. Now, a little context of all this, my first trip to Israel was in 1988. I was there in the mid-90s, and I was there July 2001. It was a very trying time, and right before 9/11 of this country. I go back on this trip, and I was stunned. You know, over this period of time, you've seen everything that happened. I did some traveling, not a lot of traveling in the West Bank, but enough, you know, twice into Bethlehem, and enough to go look around and see something for myself. But when I went back this trip, and you see a 25-foot wall with barbed wire on the top, I don't even know what the barbed wire for on the top is. Nobody's going to scale that wall. But it was just astonishing. The roads, the infrastructure, the things that have been put into place over that, you know, it didn't seem like a long time, about 15 years. And I think some of what's happening in this country is happening in that country. After 9/11, I think we've, as a country, have given up some things. And it's what our founding father, you know, Franklin talked about. You know, our concern for security, we're giving up our liberty. And when that comes for us, that goes for the world. We cannot trade the fear of us not being secure by giving up the liberties of our people here or anywhere else around the world. So the labor movement is true to one thing, is to have a strong debate, discussion. There's a resolution that's drafted. I think we're probably one of the first state feds in the country to offer a resolution. It's very controversial about when you start talking about boycott and divestment, because it's about some of the things that we do here in this country, about what we make and what we sell. Caterpillar is made by the UAW, and it's going to have an impact on them. But clearly, this is something that's not new to us. I was there for the you know, the South African boycott and how it came about. And the Connecticut AFL-CIO is not empowered as an organization to take the position, but they are empowered to take a position to recommend to the national unions that they take this up and have that discussion. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen next week at the AFL-CIO convention. It's a remarkable thing for this state to have happened. And let me just say this to the Treasurer of the state of Connecticut. She's empowered as the fiduciary. But it's important that we talk to our legislature, because whether it was the McBride principles that dealt with Northern Ireland, whether it be South Africa, or whether it be this, every time the legislature got involved and they passed and directed our treasurer to, at that time, to get involved in it. So there's a lot of work for us, not only to do with the treasurer, but to do with every state senator, every state representative, and the governor of the state. And again, thank you all for taking the time, and it really, to me, is all about justice for workers. And I guess, I don't know if it ever showed up, but to think that 32,000 people have to get up every morning at 2 o'clock and go to a checkpoint to go through, and I can't imagine what it's like now, because it's gotten a lot worse since we were there 2 weeks ago, and have to go through that checkpoint just to try to make a living to support themselves and a family. That's what it's about. It's not about the politics of this country or anywhere else. It's about justice, and labor rights are human rights, because that's what we have to do every day. We all get up at work. And again, thank you all for being here.
And I saw where the workers, 12,000 of them, line up at 3 o'clock in the morning to see if it might be possible to get through a checkpoint to go to work. And if they are injured on the job, they're summarily dropped off at a checkpoint and forfeit whatever compensation they may have received. 3 weeks ago, I planted fruit trees on the farm of Sami Abed. Settlers came down the hill and they poisoned and killed many of his olive trees. They have tried to drive him out and buy him out, but he won't sell and he certainly will not sell out. And despite his suffering, his spirit is indomitable, saying with a smile, "This is my heaven. Why would I want to leave?" And being with him reminded me of my Muslim friend Ibrahim Khalil. Settlers came and drilled holes and inserted poison in 900 of his olive trees. And I'm ever so grateful for this church working in partnership with the Parents Circle and Ibrahim Khalil to replant all 900 of those trees. But Ibrahim suffered an even greater tragedy. Sadly, his child was run over and killed by a settler who did not even stop to call for help. Ibrahim's grief-stricken wife never recovered from that tragedy. And sadly, Ibrahim himself died of cancer 2 years ago. I love Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela, but I have equal love and equal respect for this Muslim man, Ibrahim Khalil. And for some inexplicable reason, this olive farmer from Palestine majored in English literature, specializing in American literature. And I don't know how he learned about her, but he loved Emily Dickinson as much as I do. Quoting her, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings a tune without the words and never stops at all." Pretty words, maybe even innocuous words when you're sitting in the comfort of a New England meeting house. But they are noble and they are courageous and they are inexplicable words when they're said by those who live under occupation, those such as Ibrahim Khalil. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. How do you say that when your child is killed and your trees are destroyed and your beloved wife languishes for the rest of her life in a psychiatric ward? It says something about the capacities of the human spirit. And so do not say to me, "Too bad the Palestinians haven't learned the power of nonviolent resistance." They live it and they breathe it every single day. And we need to understand that the fulcrum of change is here with us. Give me a lever and I can move the world. What we need is a little more leverage. And that's what the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is all about. And so I'm thankful for my own denomination, the United Church of Christ, and its resolution. I'm thankful to Jewish Voice for Peace and its bold initiatives. And I'm thankful to United Electrical for its comprehensive resolution. As I think about the powerful coalition of the trade unions in South Africa and the South African Council of Churches in their struggle against apartheid, I'm very, very thankful for the union members who came back from our last Tree of Life journey, resolved to be in solidarity with workers in Palestine. And Roger, I want to publicly thank you for your voice of conscience and integrity, saying to Bon Jovi, who performed in Tel Aviv just a few weeks ago, "You had a chance to stand on the side of justice. The dead cannot remind you of the crimes you've ignored. But lest we forget, to stand by silent and indifferent is the greatest crime of all."
I wrote about the Connecticut Union Federation decision in an article on TruthDig. Access it via a link on our site, thestruggle.org. Not all the news on BDS is good. These cartoons are from Carlos Lattouf. They're about an outrageous decision by the French Supreme Court that makes a peaceful call for BDS against French law. This is real. At the end of October, the court upheld the conviction of a dozen people who leafleted a supermarket with a flyer that said, "Buying Israeli products means legitimizing crimes in Gaza." For that, they had been convicted of violating a French hate crime law. And if the Zionists have their way, the same will happen in the U.S. We've talked about the case of Amr Jabran over the past year. He was arrested in Jordan and given a 10-year sentence at hard labor for an act of supposed terrorism. Recently, the renowned human rights organization Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch issued a joint statement about the case, which read in part, "As Amr Jabran, a Jordanian of Palestinian descent, serving a 10-year prison sentence, awaits a ruling by Jordan's highest court on his case, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are calling on the Jordanian government to ensure a prompt, impartial, and independent investigation into allegations that he made the confession that contributed to his conviction under torture and other ill treatment. Such an investigation should identify if torture and other crimes took place, and if there is enough admissible evidence, lead to the individual suspected of having ordered, carried out, and otherwise participated in such acts being brought to justice." The two organizations said, further, if such allegations are substantiated, the competent authorities should ensure that Amr Jabran is given a fair and prompt retrial. You may have noticed that America's wars are not ending. We're not leaving Afghanistan. U.S. jets are back bombing in Iraq. And now we're sending boots on the ground to Syria. To reflect on this, a piece from Democracy Now!, where retired Colonel Andrew Bacevich talks about the current state of affairs. In 2007, Bacevich's son was killed in Iraq. Ironically, a month after Andrew Bacevich wrote about the monumental folly of that Iraq war.
Can you talk about what is happening today? As the major networks pole dance, right? That sort of dance around the polls in the national elections for president, that focus on this. The U.S. government is increasingly entrenched in wars around the world. The latest, the announcement of increased involvement in Syria. Of course, we know about Iraq and Afghanistan. Your response?
Well, I think the way you pose the question, you're really putting your finger on the main issue. And it is an issue that gets largely ignored by the media and certainly ignored by those aspiring to be the next president. We have been engaged militarily in an enterprise that, by my telling, has now gone on for 35 years, beginning with the promulgation of the Carter Doctrine back in 1980, a project that assumes that somehow or other the adroit use of American military power can bring order, pacify, democratize, somehow fix large parts of the Islamic world that are increasingly enveloped in turmoil. And yet, when we look at U.S. military actions across this entire span of time, what we see is that however great U.S. military power may be, it does not suffice to achieve those objectives that our leaders claim they seek to achieve. And I think that the present moment in the Obama administration is simply a further affirmation of that larger point. I hate to agree with the White House press secretary, but I do agree that the introduction of 50 special operations forces really does not constitute a major change in policy, because the policy of the Obama administration, since the rise of ISIS and since we began to involve ourselves in the Syrian civil war, has been one of incrementalism. Earlier, you played that clip of the president warning against mission creep. His policy has been one of mission creep, and the likelihood that the introduction of a handful of dozen of U.S. soldiers, regardless of how skillful they are, the likelihood of that making any meaningful difference in the course of events is just about nil.
Andrew Bacevich, you hear the White House press secretary, not even the president, because the president has said no boots on the ground. Whether or not the policy is different, as you point out, there are probably many more special ops forces on the ground. But it's what the Obama administration is admitting to that's different.
Well, that's true. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we focus on these inconsistencies, the president, a year ago said X, and now the policy seems to be Y. It's important to note the inconsistency. But my argument would be it's far more important to take stock of the dimensions of this administration's military efforts in that part of the world, and then to connect them to the military efforts undertaken by his several predecessors. Only then, it seems, do we get an appreciation of the magnitude of our military failure. And only by taking stock of the full magnitude of our military failure can we come to an appreciation of the imperative of beginning to think differently about our approach to the region.
How do you end war? I'm putting this question to a military man, right? Professor and retired Colonel Andrew Bacevich. But talk about the different approach that could be made. For example, the Iran nuclear deal as a model.
Great question. There are two ways to end the war. The one way is to win it. And here is where I'm again taking issue with the president's incrementalism. If one were to posit, and this is not my view, but if one were to posit that the United States has a vital U.S. national security interest in destroying ISIS and a vital U.S. national security interest in bringing a prompt end to the Syrian civil war, then it would necessarily follow that instead of this minimalist approach to waging the war, which is what we're doing, then one ought to go all out and win it. Make it a big war. And yes, make it a big war, understanding that if we look at the consequences that followed the 2003 invasion of Iraq, a big war will once again, almost assuredly, lead to unintended and undesired consequences. But if this is an important thing, one way you end the war is to go win it. The alternative, it seems to me, is to recognize that there are some wars that are unwinnable and should not be fought, and where if there is a solution to the problem, it has to come from non-military means. The president has repeatedly, as president, argued that he has no desire to see this country perpetually engaged in war. And yet his actions, and you earlier cited many of the different cases, his actions have belied that claim, have instead had the effect of perpetuating the war, but perpetuating them in a sense that they continue to simmer. They do not result in any kind of a resolution. So the answer to the question, again, either you win it or you get out.
We close with the amazing Remi Kanazi, a poem he delivered during his recent tour stop in New Haven.
This poem will not end apartheid. My words, no matter how beautiful, clever, or carefully strung together, will not end the occupation, allow the refugees to return, or create equality within Israeli society. The status quo is a fantasy, telling us it's okay to sit on our hands, called political art propaganda, rather than those who politicize our lives, propagandists. Every American should ask themselves this question: why are bombs and white phosphorus getting dropped on open-air prisons with money that should be going to pay for your medical expenses. And dear academics and leftists, I appreciate your books on Israeli massacres, but you refuse to take the bullets out of IDF guns with your stances. The problem is not just the occupation or putting a better face on Zionism, because 750,000 Palestinians were displaced before those settlements were constructed, half of them before Israel was even created. We don't need another book explaining the situation. Maybe that one. We don't need another book explaining the situation. We need a lesson plan to stop the next bomb from dropping. Silence is complicity. Over-intellectualization tells us to theorize on the power of art. While farmers are kicked off land, children are stolen on the way to school, people are caged in, beaten and split from loved ones, bombed and broken in open-air prisons, bought and paid for with our tax dollars. We're part of the problem. That's not theoretical. So yes, it's time to boycott all Israeli products and go to the root of the conflict. Every 729 cultural institution and dialogue farce, from Sabra to Ahava, Max Brenner to Aroma, Lev and Motorola, signing that 2-year contract. It stacks up little to 66 years of continued ethnic cleansing. Finally, to all you artists, building bridges between apartheid and normalization, you serve an agenda which rebrands colonialism as enlightened liberalism, concerts, ballets, and raves in Israel's Sun City, a haven and party stop for pinkwashers who callously ignore Palestinian LGBTQ groups fighting against all systems of oppression. Palestinian civil society has spoken. Don't cross this picket line or cash in that paycheck signed apartheid. Put down stolen beauty, cancel that gig, and join the rest of us on the right side of history.
That's our program for tonight. See you next week. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.